pull this chat up. Cool. Hope everybody's doing well. People are jumping in.
Hi.
Veronica, good morning. How are you? I think it's morning. I don't know. I don't remember. Veronica, remind me where you are.
Yeah, I'm in Overland Park, Kansas. It's 1 here, so
So it's not technically, we're not morning anymore.
not yet.
Well, we got
Yeah.
Pastor James. We got Pastor James from Uganda joining us today. So we're
No
that's
way,
Pastor
dude. No
James.
way, dude.
That's
Yep.
awesome.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Hey,
Wow.
hey, good to see
He was
all
the
of
first
you,
one on the
Pastor
call, too.
Brandon and all my pastor friends. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh,
Thanks for
this is
joining us.
amazing. I love this. We're gonna have to, Brandon, we'll make sure you introduce him. We'll give everybody a few minutes to jump on and then we'll do that. Bachman, quit ghosting me. Well, you owe me like 6 texts, but it's okay.
It's true. It's
all right.
very, very
It's
true.
It's true. It's true. Jared, good morning. How are you, bud? This is
Doing
the
good.
awkward moment. This is the awkward small group moment where all of you don't know each other, but Kay and I know, and Brandon know most of you, so we just kind of call people out. So it's
I
all
live
good.
in an awkward space, so we're good.
That's fine. That's fine. That's
I want to know
totally
who
fine.
test number 2 is and where is
Where
test
is
number
it?
1. There's a test number 2.
Where does it say that? I don't see it. I'm
Am
looking.
I the only one that sees that?
Oh,
Page 2 of the context.
Yeah, it's on page 2 for me as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Test 2.
got it.
It's an alien.
The alien.
Spine.
Everybody's doing really well. We're gonna spend just a moment just allowing people to get on, make sure that they're here and that we can get everybody in the right spot, and then we'll kind of get going with everybody. Maybe just to take time together. Some of the people will miss out, but we'll get it. There's a couple of things just as far as like some just practice. If you guys have the ability to make sure, and I think most of you do, like that we can locate who you are and all of that, just because we've been asking Tori, who's on the call, to just kind of keep track of who's showing up so we can make sure that you guys are getting the content, especially those of you that are showing up. So just to make sure she can identify you is why she's asking. She's not going to spam you or anything like that. So don't worry about that. But if you don't have, if you're not identifiable on your Zoom, if you could make that so, that would be amazing. So love that. Brandon, I think you got some intros, bro. Brandon Beard.
Yes,
I think
sir.
there's a couple of rookies on the call that you need an intro before we jump in.
Let's see. Who do I got? Who do I got?
Well, I think it is.
There's a number of people, but I want to do a shout out. We've got Pastor James from Truth Fountain Church in northern Uganda joining us today. This guy oversees a huge church there and has started hundreds of churches all over, and they are starting to use some of our Gromentum resources, and it's just awesome. So they're part of the Gromentum family, and so he's a longtime friend, and really, really awesome to have you on. So Pastor James, you got to say hello to everybody.
Yes, please. Pastor James, tell us what time it is there and then greet everybody.
Hi, praise the Lord. Hey, it's so exciting to be a part of Gromentum. And thank you, Pastor Brandon, for introducing me to this huge family of God. Greetings from Lira, Uganda. Yeah, church. It is 9 p.m. But I'm glad to connect with every one of you. I can't wait. I'm just here to learn, to fellowship and to enjoy the presence of the Lord with you guys. I can't wait the far this is going to take. Thank you.
And that's so amazing. Look, 9 p.m. The man has dedication. I love it. Anybody else that's on the call for the first time, because we have lost track of some of you. If you want to introduce yourself, you can unmute and give us who you are and where you're coming from. Austin, go ahead, bud.
Guys, my name is Austin Trammell. I am a campus pastor with Salty Church in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, just south of Daytona Beach.
Love it. Is that that's where Kevin Weir is? Is that right, Austin?
No, Robbie O'Brien is our lead pastor.
Got it. Perfect. Awesome. Who else, Brandon? Brandon, you're throwing invites like crazy.
Yeah, we got David, my buddy David Patrick's on. from Branson. David, is this your first or second time on this call?
Second time.
Yeah, I think
Second
David
time.
was here
Awesome.
last month, so it's great.
Yeah, we're
Great to
glad
have
you're
you.
here. We got Lindsay's on here from Crossroads, Grand Prairie. We got Kyle Ray from Sept Church. Shout out Kyle, Texas,
Kyle.
my friend from Texas. I'm trying to see who else. There's a lot of people here. So.
Yeah. My
Great
man
to
from Canada just popped in, so I'm glad. Good to see you, bud. Glad you're
Actually,
well.
there's two Canada. Sean is also from Canada.
Where's
in
Sean?
Toronto.
Dude.
Sean's XP at Bayview Glen. Bayview Glen Church is actually A.W. Tozer's old church. So
Wow.
pretty,
Oh, there we go.
pretty
All right.
crazy legacy there. So
So
go.
Sean's there and Adam is in Winnipeg. So Anna in Winnipeg, Canada. So I don't think you say it that way, right? You guys don't say it like that. You have like some other thing you say, but it's good to see you guys. And then Kirschman, introduce yourself, bud.
Yeah, Kelly Kirschman, executive pastor at Elevation Church out in Clearfield, Utah, just north of Salt Lake.
Sweet. Kelly and I go way back to Bible College Seminary days when he still has a lot of hair and I had some back then. So it was good. So it's good. Cool. Anybody else that's new, that is a rookie, that would just love, again, there's so many people on the call, which we love, and it's exciting. It's awesome. We don't want you to feel like,
We got Kevin.
go ahead, Brandon.
We got Kevin Rice on here. He is from Sept Church as well, works with Kyle. Shout out.
Great.
He's new to their team. Really excited to have you on here, Kevin.
Love it.
Kevin's super excited.
Glad to be on. Glad to be on.
Love it. Love it. And part of you guys, just frankly, just to give you guys some background, because there's a bunch of new guys on the call. Our objective with Momentum with this call, and you've got Kay, obviously, who's kicked this whole thing off and started this whole thing. We got Brandon, and then Derek is a new member of our team. I don't know where he is on your Brady Bunch Zoom screen, but Derek is a new member of our team that's on the call today. But part of our objective with this is just for you guys to spend an hour pausing and being able to kind of have somebody pour into you a little bit, and for us to facilitate some conversation together. So really, there's an informal formality to these think tank calls that we love, and so that's why you feel a little bit of that. Hey, I'm new and I don't know all these people, and some of these people know each other. That's completely cool, and we're good with that. That's kind of our objective, to do that and to make sure that you guys can kind of feel that kind of vibe, and so we're okay with that and want you guys to interact. Obviously, on the chat screen, you guys can ask questions. We're going to try to monitor that. Tori's there on the chat screen. If you're new to the call and you haven't been getting the actual, like if you didn't get a text this morning around the call, then you're going to want to make sure that we have your information so that we can make sure that you know when the calls are coming. Again, we promise not to do anything overtly ridiculous, but we want to make sure that you're aware of it. So make sure that Tori is grabbing that from the text. And as always, this thing is being recorded. So if you're one of those people that needs to know that, you know who you are, Brandon. It's being recorded.
Shout out Brent Deffenbacher from Fresno, California, joining us for the
Okay, there he is. All right, there's Brent. Brent, good to have you, bud. We're recording it, and so we will send this recording out to you and everybody else who is on the think tank list. So that's why if you're not on the think tank list, if you're not able to be on a call, you still want to stay on that list, because you're going to get the deck from today and you're going to get the call recording, even if you want to scrub through it or use some of it to move on with your team is great. All right, so we're going to jump in because we've got some ground to cover today, and we got basically kind of a 3-part segment. And if you want to interact, feel free to unmute, seriously, but also use the chat. I'm going to make sure, and Brandon and Derek, if you guys could really be focusing on the chat as well, that would be amazing. We're going to try to multitask here a little bit to be able to get that. One of the things that is always on our agenda with the think tank is kind of like our big mission is to help you guys accomplish your mission. That's really why we exist. And we use this terminology around working on it, not just in it. Most of you have probably spent the morning into the afternoon, depending on the time zone, or into the evening if you're in Uganda. We're working mostly in it because that's kind of what we do by definition. So our objective is for these calls to help you with your mission, and also to help you maybe pause for just a bit to work on it and give you some ammunition to work on it with your team. And so we're hopeful that some of the conversation today will do that, plus the networking that just happens that you guys get to be a part of by being on the call. So here's what we're going to do today. Kay is in control of the deck. So he's gonna throw that Think Tank Live slide up there, I think. Most of you are aware of this. We'll put this at the end as well. We'll throw it back up before we all sign off. It's only 3 weeks away. A lot of you, we've got about 50 of you that are going to be here in Vegas. There's still time, there's still space. So if there's a few of you that still want to jump in, or your schedule's opened up, or you didn't know about it and you're like, yeah, I want to go to Vegas for 2 nights and hang out with some good leaders, then make sure that you hit that think tank. Make sure that you hit that and register today so that we can get you included in that. All right, cool. Make sure you're muted if you're on the call. We'll try to mute you if we can, but make sure that you do that. All right, here's the 3 things we're going to talk about today. We're going to revisit something that we talked about back in May. It happens to be the call, if you were on the call in May, where the Zoom actually stopped working at 45 minutes. Some of you remember that, and you guys all harassed me because we didn't have a paid Zoom account. So thank you for that. So we're going to revisit something around that. We're going to talk a little bit of the engagement, and then we have a special guest that we're going to introduce that Kay's going to go back and forth with, talking a little bit more around measuring engagement and what that needs to look like. And so that's what we're going to do. So let's jump in right away. Here's the real kind of tee up for this today. You guys have seen this whole quietly quitting conversation. If you're not familiar with it, Derek, why don't you just define it, because it's your generation anyway that's doing this. So why don't you just you're muted. Why don't you just define it for us from your perspective on what that looks like?
Yeah, quietly quitting is this idea of I'm going to keep showing up. I'm going to keep collecting a paycheck. I'm going to keep being in meetings. I might even keep responding to emails, but I have checked out in some way, shape, or form on mission, vision, values. I'm doing only what's required of me, and that could stem from any number of things. But essentially, I'm still showing up, but I have, for all intents and purposes, quit the mission and the organization.
Right. Great definition. And the tension that we deal with quietly quitting is that some of us just listen to Derek and went, I can't believe people would do that. Tori kids me that I quietly fire people. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's another conversation for another day. But the tension of the conversation is there an environment that actually leads somebody to quietly quit? So do we have a culture within our church, within our staff, that would literally encourage somebody to quietly quit? Or is it something that's inherently a mismatch or flawed around the individual that's leading them to quietly quit? Because either of those things could be true for quietly quitting to actually be the choice that individual is making. Has anybody on the call had conversations with their team around quietly quitting in the last few weeks, as it's been a theme? If so, love to hear what that conversation has looked like. Anybody at all? Or maybe this is a new term for you. Jump in.
We were talking about it a little bit this week, where kind of referencing the idea of quietly quitting, but also just talking about it from the perspective of working not to lose your job rather than playing to win. And I think that they're similar in nature, in the sense that it's like you can work at a place for a long time and not get fired, and yet not accomplish the mission, vision, values of what you're trying to do. And I think, if I'm going to be honest, we're identifying in our own context, there's a fair amount of people, there are just some very key role people in our staff that are not playing to win. They are working to not get fired or quietly quitting.
Yeah, and part of the assessment tends to be, are we in a culture that's creating that as their objective? Or on the other hand, again, is it really a problem with their match or with their role or with their motivation?
Well, and that's, I think, one of the first questions we ask is, what are we doing to actually foster that sort of an environment?
Right, to make that happen. Anybody else dealing with it at all in your environment that you're in? Or you think you're dealing with it, or you're just becoming aware of it and going, dang, now I know what's going on? Anybody?
Yeah, this morning I just left an office of a staff member, and I think I've heard Carrie Newhoff talk a little bit about this
Yeah,
on his
yeah.
leadership pod. And so, I actually use the phrase, quietly quitting. I asked, I said, is that what's going on right now? I just see a little bit of the zeal out of your eye. And all I know is if he was going to Vegas with us, I would take his money, because he did a really bad poker face on me. And I could tell that he was already beginning the process of not being as
I'm
engaged.
checking out.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely a term that I'm hearing more, and it's something that you can actually see oftentimes in a staff member's eyes.
One of the things that's interesting about it is that last month, if you go back to the think tank calls, Kay shared some really good learnings and some tools around H3 and humility, humble, hungry, and hustle. And one of the things that keeps coming up with this culture of quietly quitting is some employees have decided they do not want to get caught up in the hustle anymore, or get caught up in the machinery of that. And so they're looking at it as a personal health choice that they're making to quietly quit. They did poll some people. Somebody sent it to me the other day. They pulled age groups about quietly quitting. And as you can imagine, the poll kind of went from, yeah, it's a great thing, from the early 20s to 50s and 60s going, this is terrible. No one should ever do this. Right. And so, and somebody sent it to me, and I thought that poll could have been taken over the last 400 years and it would have come out the same exact way. Right. That everybody in their 20s thinks, man, I don't want to burn out. I want to hustle as much. And everybody in their 50s says, you need better work ethic. So I'm not sure it proved that much. One of the conversations that I think would be helpful around this is on the next slide. So on the next slide, I'm sorry, Kate, keep going one more. This is a chart that we talked about, again, a few months ago. And some of us, I was just with Jared and his team last week, and we talked about this extensively. Basically, this is still kind of something that's being molded around our thinking, and as far as for you as a team. And we've combined this a little bit at times with some of our work with teams, using the thinking wavelengths exercise in combination with this is kind of an interesting dialogue to have. So let me explain this a little bit for those of you that this is a new, what you're looking at is new. And then we can dialogue about it before we turn the page. Basically, what this is seasons of life and leadership, and how they contribute to the possibility of someone actually understanding where they are in the organization, and really probably a little bit more towards contribution, even in the idea of hustle and hunger. So let me just break it down for you and then give you some chance to dialogue around it, because part of it is I've added to this chart the idea of the dark side and what is the dark side of each of these roles. So at the top, you can see season of life. One of the things I want you guys to make sure you understand is whenever we talk about these seasons of life and leadership, they are not, there's not an age thing going on. What I mean by that is there is an age where you typically are in a season, but there's not an age where you automatically transition. It's not like you get your driver's license at the age 16. This is much more fluid, and really part of the tension around these seasons of life and leadership is helping people understand what season they are in on your team, and if they need to be making a transition to another season, what that season should look like, and how do you help them actually get there. All right, so we're going to give you this chart, but here's my basic unpacking of it, is that we have 4 seasons, prince, princess, female, male roles, prince, princess, warrior, warrioress, king, queen, sage, and muse. Let me give you sort of an age range of these as we think about it. And I want you guys to be processing your current team, whether your team's small or large, where they are, and secondly, where you are on this chart. First season is prince and princesses. I always call this like 18 to 25. That's not a perfect age range, but that's kind of a ballpark of where people tend to fit into this category on our teams. And one of the things that's interesting about prince and princesses is where they best contribute is their passion and their curiosity. You might also add the word their idealism to this season, right? They're new in ministry. If you're in a church context, they're new to all of this. They've probably seen this as a destination for them, or they've worked their way into this. It's their first time really being in a role where they're really contributing, and they're idealists. They have passion, And they in a healthy, if they're healthy, they believe, man, all things are possible, right? The dark side is that they can be entitled. I think that even stems from the title itself, because generally when you're a prince or a princess, it's not something that you earned. It was generally a title that you kind of were born into. And so sometimes those that move into this phase in ministry especially sort of can struggle with an entitlement mentality when it comes to it versus understanding the season that they're in and how they can best contribute, man. Please contribute your idealism. Tell us about the things that you're seeing. Tell us about what you're experiencing. Bring that to the tables that we allow you to sit at, and it can be a pretty dynamic thing. From there, we go to warrior-esque, which a lot of you on this call probably fit within this season. And this is a little different because this moves to a season where it's kind of prime of like purpose and energy. Like I've either discovered my purpose or I'm really, really passionate about living in a purpose. And I've got energy in this season to really contribute in big ways. I would picture it as I'm putting the armor on every day. I'm putting the sword on and I'm going into battle. Like if anybody's bloody, if anybody's going to get bloody, that's me. Like I'm in a warrior phase. Okay. The dark side of warriors is that they are susceptible to burnout. This is probably the phase where a lot of people choose to quietly quit if they're in an environment that's that they deem not healthy or toxic, because they're getting bloody and they're wondering, why am I getting bloody? Why am I strapping on the armor all the day? Am I clear around the purpose that I'm supposed to have in what I'm doing? And so that's something to be aware of. Then we move to king and queen. I don't know exactly where this is, but I think for myself in my 50s, I feel like this is a season that in the recent few years I've moved into. Some of the rest of you on the call either are in it or maybe moving into it soon. And this is a season where you bring your experience as the most valuable contribution to the team, and you bring the ability to point and to give direction, to give clarity. So you leverage that experience for you to point the warriors and the princes in the right direction all the time. And so they're constantly needing that direction from the kings and queens in the organization. The dark side of kings and queens is that it can be a season where we're tired. Maybe we have experienced a little burnout from warrior season. And so there's a temptation to maybe check out a little bit, pull back too far and not contribute, to feel like we're not contributing. Because the other thing that happens in the warrior season is the ways in which you were given value and affirmation and applause probably begins to shift. So where you used to be the one getting it, now you're having to get it sort of residually through the warriors and the princesses that are around you. And so sometimes that can lead to you going, man, I don't even know if anybody even cares I'm here. I'm just going to check out, where you're really needed. The last one is sage and muse. I don't think there's probably anybody on this call besides Blue who is in this season this is a season where you've got wisdom and advice to bring, right? Maybe you're in that latter season of your ministry. You've been there, done that. This is really kind of I'm finding in my own ministry and life, this is a little bit of an anemic area that we have within the church, where we actually have people who understand their role as a sage or a muse, and they're able to give that wisdom and advice, because the best sages are the ones who don't have an agenda, right? They're the people in your organization or in your church that have all of these years. They love the church, they love Jesus, and they really don't have an agenda. So when you come to them for advice, they're going to give you the best advice that they have from their warrior king years, and they're going to go do that. Let me know how it goes. Come back if you need more advice. When you deal with sages and muse who have an agenda, sometimes their advice can be can have their own personal agenda behind it. A couple of comments, and then I'll shut up and let you guys ask questions or reflect. There is a challenge sometimes of moving princes to the warrior phase. That sometimes you're going to have, it's those younger staff people in your team that need to really kind of start getting bloody. And so you have to kind of work directly with them, trying to figure out. We had a staff member who actually left our team on their own because we kind of were saying, hey, it's time to be a warrior. And they were like, no, I need to be a prince. I enjoy the prince life. And so they exited. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is from the king perspective, from the warrior perspective, nobody loves a warrior on the team who acts like a king or a queen. So if they're supposed to be a warrior or a warrioress and they act like a king or a queen, that's usually problematic for the dynamic or for really the morale of your team, because they're going, man, I'm pointing you this way and telling you what to do. And people are like, no, you need to get next to me and start doing battle. So be aware of that. Thirdly, if you're a king or a queen, you generally don't have to announce that to everyone. People just know it. So if you have to tell people you're the king or tell people you're the queen, you probably aren't. Because that's generally when someone who has that role of experience and direction is at the table or in the room, people defer and they understand that role. So that's an interesting thing for us. Before we pivot the call, we'll take some questions to think about, looping back to the quietly quitting of going, do I understand where I am in my season? Secondly, does my team really understand where they are? And are we leveraging that to its best ability? Are we expecting everybody to be a warrior? Are we expecting everybody to be a prince? Are people moving when they should move? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an interesting thing to lay over the quietly quitting that you can throw up on the screen with your team at the next time you work on it together and actually have a dialogue around. All right. Comments or questions on that? Steve, Owens, you've heard this a few times. Talk to me about how it's worked out within your team and how you kind of analyzed your team using this grid.
Yeah, Lee, this has been solid for us and specifically for me. And by the way, I think you ought to write a book on this, but I think it lets me understand not only the phases that I've been through, because I think I've walked through each of these. It allows me to identify where I am, and I'm not in the sage category, but I am at a place where I can come alongside the warrior, the warrioress, the prince, and the princess, and assist them. And I think that's one of the things that I've been able to experience myself is, as a king in my role, what can I do to facilitate the prince, the princess, the warrior, the warrioress, and also who in my life is a sage to me that can speak into my life and help our team grow. And so this has been golden, Lee, and we've used it a couple of times with our team, and it's been very good, very practical.
Cool. A minute or two more. Anybody else want to comment? Where are you on this structure, or where you need clarity around this?
I think this is Kyle out of Texas.
Hey, Kyle.
Two thoughts that came to mind. One is just, we all have a more glamorous view of our past maybe than what it was in reality. I kind of feel like when I was in the Prince stage, I had more respect for the kings and queens and sages and muses. I had more respect for their wisdom and their experience than it seems like the princes and the princesses have today. But that just sounds like an old man talking. The other reality is, my trajectory was, most of that pathway from prince to warrior to king was in one organization, and then switching to 3 years ago to a different church and a different environment. I've had a lot of, times over the last 3 years, including, pandemic leadership through all of that, where it's felt like the credibility that was built up in the longer term in the other organization, it's like, it's this whole journey of like reestablishing that credibility. So, the experience is there, the ability to set direction is there, but combining that with the sense of entitlement with princes and princesses and just having to reestablish credibility has been an interesting journey.
Gold. And I think
Lee.
it's true. Yeah, please go, whoever that is.
It's Blue. I'm sorry. And I know I'm visitor, but it's kind of in lines with the metrics that I know we wanted to talk about. So for what it's worth, prior to working in ministry as a venture capitalist, that's where I directly came out of. And all that meant is companies would come to us and they'd bring out all their information. And we do this massive due diligence to see if there's value. And we'd look for issues and we called risks. Then you discount the price based on where you found risks. Well, one of the metrics we looked for was turnover rate. And there was two pieces to it. High turnover, maybe there's some risks. But if there was turnover that was less than 5% annually, it usually indicated to us that people aren't having conversations that should happen. And I'm probably going to get stuck with that if I buy this company. So we actually looked for a certain degree of turnover as a positive feature of management and leadership doing their job. And we created something we call, even at our church, we called it redefine the win. The win is not keeping everybody employed no matter what. The win was discerning if there was a fit, and if there was no longer a fit, then addressing it properly and effectively. And so literally every 3 years, we actually offered a nice off ramp for those who might be in the quietly quitting phase. It was a little bit more lucrative, but it gave them the option with dignity to raise their hand and say, either my season has changed, like you're talking about, or just my season of life. I have a 4th kid now, and whatever else is happening, I'm not sure. And we could do that. So anyways, for what it's worth, we saw it as a positive thing to identify not fit, as long as you honor it and treat it well, and actually look for a metric to identify doing that.
Love it. Good stuff. Again, I think that before I hand it over to Kay and Blue, I think that what's interesting is that there, as I said earlier, there isn't an age component necessarily. I think there's some degree of that, right? Of just experience that leads to it. But I think there are seasons, to Kyle's point, where you get thrown into something. Maybe you're doing something new. Maybe you're doing a venture that's new, and you have to be a warrior again, right? Like you've been operating as a king, but now this season requires you to be that. I think that's a valid thing to look at and look at your team through this lens. Again, we've got so many things that we have that you guys have seen to evaluate your team. I think this just is another one to look at to see maybe they're not defining their roles or their season of life correctly if you're frustrated with them. So I think that's important. Last comment, anybody?
Well, Lee, you touched on it, and it's exactly what I was thinking. I was, up until a year ago, I was a worship pastor for over 20 years. And so at that point, I felt like I was a king in that role. Now I've only been an XP now for a year. And so now I have a hard time viewing myself as that in this role because I'm so new at it. And so it's kind of a situation where I'm kind of in between, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And as a king, there are times where I have to strap the sword and the armor on and get into battle with my warriors. But then what I'm learning with them is they keep saying to me at times, like, we're good now. Like, you can step away. And so I'm hearing more of that on a regular basis than I used to. So we're going to send you this, you guys. You can use it if you want to talk more about it. One of the things we're going to do, you guys, as I tee up Kay and Blue, is the calls we're confident are very helpful for you guys. One of the things that a few of you have asked for is like a deeper dive. So one of the options we're going to give you post call is, if this is something that you guys want to talk about, we're going to set up a smaller call for people that say, hey, I'd really love to dive deeper into that and be able to dialogue a little more. And so if you're in the chat and you want to say like, hey, I'd like to dive deeper into this seasons of life thing and leadership and a smaller call, just dump your name in there and we'll send out an invite to you. And we're going to do the same with the dialogue that Kay and Blue are going to have. So I'm going to flip it to Kay. He's going to introduce Blue, and they're going to pivot a little bit here.
Yeah, one other just last thought around this is that I think many times when we're looking at this is a good common language to be able to use in your conversations with staff. And so, but the thing about it is that it's like you really can't skip these seasons. You really have to go through these things in order to be able to earn that credibility, as Kyle, you mentioned and stuff too. And the interesting dynamic comes into play when you've actually done these different seasons in a different context and you come into a new context. And so there's some really interesting dynamics that come into play, that they have to actually see some of the previous elements of those seasons, even in a newer context, even though you might be at a different stage or season in your context too. So it's just pretty fascinating. So looking forward to the deeper dive conversations around this. As we do with these think tank calls, we actually take almost even some like random topics in some sense, because sometimes people gravitate toward one topic and sometimes people gravitate toward another topic, or it identifies for them to be able to say, hey, I want to do a deeper dive on this specific topic in my context, or what we're currently experiencing from a pain point perspective. And so we've talked about it a lot on this call, but especially for the new people and even a refresher, pre-COVID, we talked a lot about this, is that engagement was really centered around the gathering. Everything that we do from a groups, volunteering, giving, and invite, all those things were the centerpiece was the gathering. And so what happened during COVID was that when the gathering suffered, whether it be because we couldn't meet physically for a very long time, or because people were not ready to come back in whatever capacity, what we saw was all of these engagement pieces suffered. And that's because we put such an emphasis on the gathering, and gathering was the center point of everything. And so that's why we've adopted, and other people are definitely using this, but that engagement is the new attendance. That if we just gravitate towards building a bigger gathering and growing that gathering, we're going to be straight back into a different or into the old paradigm of things. And definitely COVID has played the accelerator role. And so we know that attendance even looks very differently on the other side of things, even though a lot of us have returned to post-COVID numbers. And so with that, what does it look like to be able to actually not put the gathering at the center hub, but actually put engagement? And so that's why we created this church on mission that many of you adopted. In fact, some of you in the call have even done recently vision nights around this, where you've actually challenged your people to be able to say, hey, what does it look like to take a step in one or multiple areas of this? And basically what we're saying around this is that if engagement is the centerpiece of everything that we do, one of the greatest examples of this is a church plant. If you think about a church plant doesn't start with a gathering. In fact, it's actually the last thing that is added from an engagement perspective. The church plant actually starts with the community of people who are connecting deeply, serving one another, even investing and giving to it, and then influencing, inviting, and really growing the core way, way before they gather. And because of that, that's a great, healthy model. In fact, it's an Acts 2 model, right? And so when we think about that from that perspective, the gathering is actually a byproduct of people's engagement. And that's why it's such an important piece. Now, we do understand and know that the gathering does play a role in helping people take a step towards engagement. But this is where we've broken it down. We've basically said, what does it look like to actually really get people? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is discipleship. This is growing in our relationship and our love for Jesus when we are all growing in these pieces and doing these things. And so we talk a lot about pathways and pipelines. You can check out our previous calls around some of those things, or you can tap us about any questions that we have, because we've developed our pipelines to be able to say, what does it look like to take active steps towards each one of these engagements? And maybe they need to take a little easier, obvious step before they actually take the step that you really want them to take. And what does that all look like? And then what is the pathway in which you actually get somebody from a gathering perspective to actually engage into the different elements in which you do? So with all of that, one of the things that we want to do is we wanted to introduce Blue to the conversation, because he's been doing a lot of work in this area for many years. And specifically, Blue comes from the marketplace. He was an auto executive at Mercedes and different places, as well as the venture capital that he was talking about earlier. But then he actually went into the church space, and he was an executive pastor at Christ Church of the Valley in the Phoenix area, with the multi-campus, very, very large church that you guys have all heard of. And he was there as an XP. And one of the things that he really focused on was the metrics, the dashboards, the engagements. And that's a question that we often get a lot is, all right, if we are prioritizing this, then how do we measure it? What do we measure? What's the frequency in which we are to measure these things? And how do we make sure that we're on the right track? And so I definitely wanted to introduce Blue and let him take over a little bit, and we'll definitely dialogue throughout it. But thanks, Blue, for being here.
Thanks for the intro. Love being here. And I love it. I'm so far from Sage. When you're sitting here just stealing screenshots and trying to take notes, I think that's the first indication, great metric, that you're not Sage. So thanks for letting me steal this stuff. Great brain trust on here. Here's my first kind of disclaimer as we go through a lot of these things. I think metrics, as we look at them, we got to remember this, it's all about decision-making for me, right? It's not about trying to compare myself to somebody else or get an outreach or do something else. It's, does it help uncover? And I used to say this, I'd say, listen, I want the report to help me dissect and digest the data so I can find hidden insights inside there so I can make smarter decisions. Does it help tell me what lever I need to pull or a lever I'm pulling too hardly on or something? So yes, there are some consistent ones I think that we all share universally in churches, but I think the key is make sure it's the metrics that help you deliver on your strategy, right? So that's my takeaway with some of these is that the metrics are really difficult to come up with if you haven't locked in your strategy or your methodology. The metrics should definitively, in my opinion, be measuring a component of your strategic approach. So church on mission, for instance, I love it. Our growth strategy when I came onto the church at CCV was something very, very similar to this. It's all about member engagement as a growth strategy, right? So we would say this thing that we want to grow definitively, but we think growth is best accomplished by engaging your existing members, and you engage them by making them personal. Our engagement of our members, okay, and I'm gonna speak it from two sides. One, listen, I don't care what we're all overselling, it's the Great Commission, right? Make disciples and send them out. So I get to put cute PowerPoints to the Great Commission. In the marketplace, we ran the same play. So I just want you guys to know that I'm stealing all of this from somebody else as well, and it's come up. But you mentioned I was at Mercedes for a while, came out of grad school as a marketing exec, and I thought, I got to come up with some really, really cool advertising. The number one thing they indoctrinated into me was that advertising to new customers is secondary to actually engaging our existing members. So very specifically, we'd spend about $1,200 in advertising every time to bring somebody new into the brand. Then once they bought a car, one of our cars, we'd spend about $300, so 25% to engage them well, right? In my world back then, it was things like ride and drives and swag and other kind of things. And if we did a good job creating what we termed, this is the secular world, what we termed a brand evangelist. Time out. I think we stole it from the market. The market stole it from the church long before we stole it from the market. But anyway, we created a brand evangelist. If we did a good job, we found that a brand evangelist brought 4 people into the product for us. So you got a 4x ROI with 25% of the investment. So this idea of taking, if you just Google customer engagement, that's what this is. We just call it member engagement in the church world. But the idea is that you're going to get a much greater success and a much higher growth if you focus on that. That's all new organic growth. That doesn't even talk about the retention that you get and the lowering of your, attrition rate by focusing on your members as well. So to me, it's a no-brainer as far as that's a strategy. Then we developed our metrics in support of that strategy. So that would be the number one thing I'd say. Make sure that you got your strategy down before you sit there and try to come up with it. And the second thing is make sure they're your metrics, guys. Right. At the end of the day, we all have some standards because we want to talk about, but put that aside and make sure that it's about getting your metrics. The other thing that I had to really push on and be okay with, and I hope everybody is here too, was this idea that we want to be accurate, but we'll probably never be precise. Right. I wanted enough data and information to be able to make decisions. Okay. So as I'm tracking engagement, there's a chance that somebody's going to go to church, sit up in the balcony, use a flip phone. I'm not going to know they're there. I don't want that to mean I stop trying to track and find out who's going to church so that I can serve them better. All right. So accuracy versus precision as we go through this. And then I'll just show you some of the stuff. And I really want to spend more time for dialogue with Kay and then open up questions. But we broke our metrics into 2 different buckets. Okay. One called dashboards and one called scorecards. And I get a lot of questions, and I think we intermingle these things quite a bit. Here's the role of the dashboard for me. The dashboard is current looking, it's current facing. Think of it literally like the dashboard of your car, that it's not helping me figure out where to get someplace. It's telling me how the engine's running today. Am I running a little hot? Do I have enough resources to get there? What's happening with this? So I would say our dashboard should always be current looking. It should be cumulative, meaning I want to see this over time. I want to measure some of the things over time so I can find correlations. So I'm going to always measure, and I'll show you an example of kind of some of the things we put in our dashboards. Should be standardized, and it should be something that is fairly easy for everybody to understand in support of our mission. Maybe okay, with your permission, maybe I'll pull up what we used as a sample dashboard. Does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Let me see there. Can you guys see that okay then? I want to make sure. Yep, good. All right, so here was one of the dashboards that we used, if you guys can see that. Now, I stripped out some of the numbers. But I'm gonna tell you very simply as a church. So when I joined the church at CCV, this is a little bit of a blue thing. Okay, and here's what I mean by that. We can actually disagree and we all get to go to heaven still, right? You don't have to buy into this. But what I found was,
So it's not heresy. Is this heresy, Blue, or is this like?
I don't think so. I think we're allowed to go with this. So here's what I found. I found that our church, and by that I mean our staff and key leaders and lay pastors, whatever you want to call them, were pretty solid in what our vision was. They were pretty solid in what our mission was all about. And they were pretty solid with regards to our value statement. Now, I know not every church is there, but I think our church in the size did a pretty good job in those three. I feel like there's a fourth element that was missing, and that was our strategy. And we have a vision to win the valley for Christ. Our mission is to win, train, and send believers, right, out there. And our value is to live through this thing. We have to trust in Christ. What we couldn't answer is how. What's our mission? That was the church on mission, our version of that. And it included this engagement. So what I wanted is the metrics that I show to help build and reinforce an understanding of everybody around the mission. So it was critical that we had that baked into the dashboard that we reviewed constantly. So a couple things you'll see on this. Average weekend attendance was something we still measured. We measured that primarily for a couple reasons. One is it gave us a standard of whether we were growing or not. More importantly for me, and I think you guys know this, organizations, in my opinion, don't grow and don't evolve in this nice, pure little hockey stick. They evolve in these stair steps. Okay. Now, for myself as a venture capitalist, we've actually identified what is a typical trigger of those steps based on when they hit a certain revenue number. When you hit $1 million in revenue, it usually requires a different type of org structure. When I hit 10 million, I usually look for change. 50 million, 100 million plus. Those are rough triggers of when I think an organization might need new processes, new systems, new approach. I was looking for the equivalent of that in church. And what most people don't realize is I believe that's what average weekend attendance does for us. And it helps us understand we get close to a certain number. We should start thinking about what we knew in the organization with regards to processes and systems and people and org structures that might need to change. That was the primary reason. Then we got in, and these were our steps of engagement. So this idea that if we're going to do church well, and I love how dialogue-based and easygoing this is. Here's what got to me all the time. I'd walk out and I'd say, hey guys, this is our mission as a church. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Are we any good at it? Like, are we doing it? And I'm not kidding you, I'd get this question all the time. We're pretty good. And I'd say, based on what? I don't know. I mean, it feels pretty good, right? It feels like we're doing all right. So what we said is, if our job is to get people to do these things, to be engaged in our church, we want them baptized, we want them going to church regularly, connecting with people, that's usually small group ministry, getting small groups, serving, giving, training. I wanted to know if we're doing any good at it. Okay, so that's why we started measuring these steps. I wanted to look at it a couple different ways. So I wanted to be able to look at it by ministry. So our adult ministry, our student ministry, and then our total, right? Kids were tied to adults most of the time. I wanted to look at it as a percent of our total active church and as a percent of weekend attendance. Both of those gave me a little bit of an understanding as to how well we were performing. Right. And then I wanted to be able to dial down through the levels. So we took this same scorecard that you're seeing here, and what you're seeing is sort of, and I've changed the numbers just so you guys know to keep it, some confidence there. But we did it at what I'll call a global level for the whole church. I had a scorecard by campus. We had 14 campuses. Each campus had their own scorecard. I had a scorecard, the same number that you're on there, by associate pastor, because we assigned members of the church to them. We actually gave a scorecard to our small group leaders because we challenged our small group leaders to help the people in their group take these steps to be more engaged. We called them the pastors of their living room. So I wanted to be able to say to them very clearly, this is how well you're doing, right? If our job is to get people more engaged and take steps, nobody's taken a step for 4 years in your small group, right? So we just looked at some of these, but we took this same scorecard, global, corporate, whatever you want to call it, all church, campus, pastor, even all the way down to small group leader. And then ultimately we're just sharing with people where they are. And then there's some basic sort of numbers that we needed with regards to operations, running the church. And I'll kind of talk to you a little bit more about why we looked at giving and first-time visitors. Labor rate is an operational efficiency. We chose to do that. I'm going to tell you that one of the goals we set, even with regards to our labor rate, was to reinforce engagement. So we artificially cap our labor at 35% of giving because it requires my staff to use volunteers because you can't hire enough people to do it. So I always track to see how were we, running against that 35% goal. The other thing that we added in was we wanted to invest in our team. And so we looked at staff development, and I wanted every campus and leader to understand whether that was something that was unbalanced. We stopped doing it. So these were all about sort of running the business. These were outputs on it. But this was a scorecard that remained consistent for year after year after year. So I could find correlations in there about things we did. Okay. So, and then we'll do more dialogues. So that's dashboard.
Okay.
Now let's switch over to what I'll call a scorecard. Okay.
Hey, Blue, real
Yeah.
quick, how often would you look at this, or how often would you, because this is big picture. Some of these guys are working with smaller scale, you know that.
Yep.
So how often would you pay attention to this?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Or encourage somebody to pay attention?
Yeah. So I had it available always. So just like my dashboard, it was something that I could look at. Where we formally reviewed it is the first Monday of every month. We brought in the executive team, the ministry leads, and the campus teams. We all got in a room together, and the first thing we did is review our dashboard. Right. And now what would be really neat, this is where I kind of felt like, you know, mic drop moment, I can do my thing, is when I'd show up at that meeting and the campus pastors would be reviewing and seeing each other's scorecards and started talking to each other. Like, how in the world are your numbers around groups so well? What are you doing differently? And so it created this opportunity for the insights. Remember, it really isn't about the number. It was about uncovering insights so we could make better decisions and move quicker. And so when we got them talking to each other, that was by far the highlight. But it was available always. We used an enterprise reporting engine. There's tons of them out there. You know, we use Domo to start with. We've recently moved over to Tableau. There's Power BI. There's a whole bunch of them. So I just bought user licenses for the ministry leads, the campus pastors, and the executive team, so they could pull up the dashboard, which was pre-built and constantly refreshing. They could see it at any time. But I formally reviewed it once a month with everybody on, with the key leaders on staff. It's a great question.
Let's pause for a second. Yeah, let's pause for a second, Blue.
Yeah.
Okay, anything you want to add, or anybody want to ask? It's a lot. It's fire hose. I knew this was coming to you guys, right? So anybody want to ask some questions? Come on.
I do think that the distinction between the dashboard and the scorecards is really important, because when you talk about dashboards, you know, that's something, once again, you want to see it as a glance and something that you really look at from a perspective that it really is measuring in a lot of ways the operation side of things. Scorecard really is like, what's the goals in which you have and how are you doing around that? So Blue, you want to talk a little bit about the scorecard?
Yeah, and then guys, please interrupt me, because I love this stuff. I get passionate about it. It creates insights, but you're going to have to interrupt me. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. So,
well, Blue, as you explain it, just I would say, I would just be curious, to what extent does the average congregant attending know about any of these scorecards? I know your small group leaders did, but the person that just shows up twice a month and they're worshiping and they're loving the church, to what extent do they know all of this stuff is being measured?
yeah, so we chose, particularly around engagement, this idea of engagement, to expose that to every single member. All right. So yes, as far as them knowing that we actually find it. Now, what we looked at it is I'm not judging you. What I'm trying to do is encourage you. These are persistent encouragements that this is something we want you to do to get involved with the church, because we think your relationship with Christ will grow. I was just going to even show everybody, you know, quickly kind of it. I'm just a member of the church, but right now, as a member of the church, you can go in, any member right now, and they can actually see the steps that they've taken or not with any particular thing. So and you probably look that on the screen here with this. So we exposed directly what would happen, and then we would talk to people. So our annual report, actually don't have it in this slide deck right now. Our annual report showed the total number of steps that were taken by people in our church. So we actually flipped sort of our primary metric from attendance. Hey, we want you to come to church. We definitely, that's an important, we do, hear me, we believe that you should gather as a community of believers. That's incredibly important. But we didn't show on our annual report. If you go in right now to CCV's website and pull up the annual report, what it shows is the total number of steps taken in a year by all of our members. How effective were we at getting people to grow closer to Christ so that we can build disciples to go out? So
hey, Blue, if somebody's sitting in there going, Blue, this is really nice. You're at CCV. You're like, you know, you're running 5 figures. I'm this guy. I've got 500 people. I'm in
totally.
Northern California. And you know where I'm going with this. Like, give them like, hey, this is where I would start with this. If you know, that's a big question. I only have like 5 or 10 minutes, but where would you start with this with them?
Yeah, I definitively would start around the engagement, and I'm telling you, because it supports your strategy, right? If that's your strategy. But guys, hear my heart. I mean it sincerely. If you don't believe, and I don't even mean to sound funny or flippant with this, but like, don't set a dashboard to track something that you're not trying to get better at. If you don't believe that your strategy is part of the growth, why measure it? Don't waste your time. So, but I believe that the single biggest thing we can do to grow your church and the kingdom is to get your existing members and turn them into an army of salespeople. Now that is, give me grace. I love Jesus, but I'm purposely using business terms for a while, right? When I came over from this world, but this idea is that, you know, the latest studies have shown that most seekers don't even want to hear the gospel from what they consider church professionals. They want to hear it from somebody that they know, trust, and believe who's living out their faith. They find it to be more authentic and less biased, right? So I believe we have to create a bunch of people who bring people to Christ, right? And send them out. So that's what I'm measuring. That's the number one thing. That's where I'd start, right? And there are, like I was just pulling it up, you can see we literally just show people where their steps are. There you are. Here's what you've done. Here's what you haven't do. The sum of those is what I add up at the end of the year and give you as an annual report for all the members. That's what they see. As you get down to what I'll call sort of key stakeholders in the church, which would be small group leaders. We treat them differently. We call them pastors of their living room, right? They have a little bit more knowledge about what we're tracking, and we share with them a little bit more about our corporate scorecard. But we're very open with regards to 99% of what you see on the screen right there. We're very open. Labor rate is not something the congregants really care about as much. Some of those things, you know, staff development, but the giving we do. Okay.
One of the things,
Yeah.
one of the things that might be helpful is, I know talking to you, Blue, before we have to wrap and we'll let people deep dive, is when we use the term in Church on Mission that Kay just teed up, influence daily. The idea of how do we know that people are out there being the light of the world, sharing their faith. Can you explain to these guys, again, I know nobody's solved it, but how you guys have approached that real quick in 60 seconds?
Yeah, sure. I'll do it. So first thing, guys, and I'm a big believer in and out of the church of what I just call life cycles. Okay. So customer life cycle, member life cycle. In the church, I tried to oversimplify. Here's what would come out of my VC days. People would come in and they'd give us these big PowerPoints. And they'd say, hey, I need $1 billion. And I'd pause and I'd say, hey, can you just draw on the board on a single sheet of paper what it is you do as a company? Can you just show me what the customer journey is so that I can understand where you monetize and what value you bring? So when I joined the church, the first thing I did was I tried to diagram church on a piece of paper, oversimplify it, right? And I've just sort of oversimplified that our job is to take somebody way up here called not yet Christian, take them through some journey so they spit out the bottom, fully committed follower of Christ. You plug in your word, disciple, leader, coach. I'm trying not to get wrapped around the axle. And we do that because we believe that when we do that well, those people will go out to their area of influence and they'll bring them in, make disciples, send them out, right? So then we just charted all of the pieces of that journey. At the very beginning, you're not known. I don't know who you are. I want you to become known. So I outline the pieces. How am I going to make you aware of my church? How am I going to get you to consider going here? How am I going to get you to evaluate my church versus another one? And ultimately, how do I get you to raise your hand and say I'm in? Okay, that was the first part. Known in the marketplace as the purchase funnel. We called it the prospect funnel. I'm going to move you in, and I measured each one of those steps. The effectiveness of my awareness driving them to a consideration layer. So did my messaging to the public get people to go to my website where they'd consider going to church? That was the first metric. Then I measured consideration to evaluation. How effective from people went to my website to get them to show up for a first-time visit? An evaluation, folks, if you don't know, is a first-time visit, and a first-time visit is not a win. Right. So I'll tell you, from the auto space, it's the equivalent of a test drive. Could you imagine if you guys showed up at my dealership for a test drive and I tried to sell you an extended warranty, right? Get you into small group or get you baptized right away. It's too early. It's a first time visit. So I measured how effective I was from website to first time visit. We built things like plan a visit and all these things. Okay, so we measured that. And then once I had a first time visit, I was really measuring effectiveness to a third time visit. Just so you know, the metrics that we found is if you get somebody to come the third time, you have a 67% probability they'll be there a year from now. That's the trigger, right? So we put our energy in the second visit to get them to a third visit. That's where the bulk of our energy, because the data showed us that that's where I'm flipping them. The first time, they're evaluating you, and they're probably evaluating another church too, right? So we focused on second visit, those things. Now that I got you in, we switched our metrics to engagement. Okay, I got you here. So what we did, Lee, very specific to our growth, is getting them here isn't enough. Now, how do I get them engaged? And we're going to measure engagement based on their participation in these 7 areas. Okay, I know it's oversimplified. What we really want is transformation of heart. And I say this jokingly, guys, but like if Walgreens would come out with the pill, we don't have to do small group ministry anymore, right? We can just high five each other, give them the pill, and they're in for Jesus. but they're not. So I know these are activities, but that's why I want them to get in small group and serve and give, because I know when they do those things, the probability of their heart being transformed goes way up. So I measured our effectiveness at getting them to do that because I couldn't measure transformation of heart. I could measure whether they did the things that we believe create transformation of heart.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where it came from, Lee. That's why we leaned into those steps specifically. And then what we did is we said a couple things. One, I want to arm the member to know what those things are so that they can self-activate. So we made it public. These are the things I call those. I'm going to give you. So, between Mercedes and venture capital, I worked in the advertising space, worked for a large digital ad agency. We'd go to Toyota and Marriott and these guys and say, here's how the internet helps you sell your product. Okay. One of the big things that we call persistent messages, something that is a constant reminder of my brand or my thing. So these steps, these badges, these things, they're just constant reminders that I think if you asked me, if you came to me tomorrow and I had the bandwidth to sit and have a cup of coffee and you said, what can I do to grow closer to Christ? I'd ask you things like, are you in small group? Are you serving? Right? Have you given of your resources? Those things? So we just make them available. We want the members to know how to manage their step. Then we armed our staff, and I wanted the staff to be able to know where every member of our church was in that life cycle, so that they could be smarter. They could just be smarter. So that's where this metric was. So now I know Derek and where he is, and I can talk to him relevantly. I know where Lee is. So that's the second thing we did, Lee, to kind of promote this. And then we armed our small group leaders. Complete transition, but we said, hey, you're not push play people. We actually need you to be sort of pastors of your living room and to help have these conversations, because they'll talk to you before they'll talk to me. So those are the people we armed, Lee, and we just armed them with those same steps with the message of encouragement, and we measured it.
Cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, Blue. Thanks so much for sharing. Here's a couple of things that first of all, I did not mention what Blue currently does right now, and that he's the founder and the president of Studio C. And Studio C is a product, but it's also way more than just a product. It's actually an engagement tool that churches can actually use to be able to. I think somebody was asking, hey, how much does the actual the church members see and understand? They don't necessarily see the dashboards and scorecards. That's what we're measuring from a goal perspective, but they do see certain aspects, and Blue definitely has built a product around that they can actually say, hey, I would love to take a next step, and here's some of the identifiable next steps that we would ask for you to take, and even personalization and segmentation around those people who haven't taken those next steps. And so with that, the Think Tank Live that we talked about at the very beginning of the call,
come on,
Blue will actually be there, and he'll be presenting there too, so it'll be great. He's going to hang with us the whole time there, play golf with us and all that stuff too. So it'll be great to be able to.
So if they didn't want to come hang with you and IK, they can come hang.
Correct.
With Blue.
Yep. He could definitely be there with Blue.
I'm not sure the selling point, but
yeah. So would love for you to do that. Also, in the follow-up email, you'll see Blue's contact so that you can actually contact him directly too. And then there'll all be on the deck, we'll also include some of the things that we've seen as best practices from dashboard and scorecard rhythm. Like what have we seen that's been effective from a weekly, monthly, and quarterly perspective? The most important thing I think from a data perspective and metrics is that you do, like, I love what Blue said, and it's what we talk about when we talk about alignment. And that is, hey, you measure towards your strategy. You measure towards your strategy that actually accomplishes your vision through the unique way in which God has called you to accomplish your mission. And so whatever you do to be able to put metrics, but the most important thing about it is pick a metrics that supports that, keep it consistent, and then measure that over time so that you see patterns and trends. Because you can compare it to another church all day long, and yet at the same time, when you see your progress and your trends in your current context, you can say, hey, what's the most important thing that we need to lean into in this next season to be able to build better strategies or gaps in which we see that we can put some initiatives around. So we've seen that data and metrics and dashboards and scorecards have actually been one of the greatest ways in which we can find the pain points in which we put our best initiatives in the next 3, 6, 9 months in order what we put 1-year plans towards and all that type of stuff. So we'll include some of those things in the deck as well. All right.
Dude, that was like fire hose for 75 minutes. Appreciate you guys hanging in. So as Kay said, and just repeating, because that's what I do. We're going to send this to you, and Tori's grabbing the chat. So if you're deep diving in there, Blue, we have some folks that would love to get on maybe with you and Kay, just a smaller group and deeper dive into this. So we'll try to figure out a time to set that up for that to happen. But again, if you want to come to Vegas, there's still room for you, and Blue will be here. He'll be doing a longer presentation and some Q&A as well as part of our day together when he's here. And so I'm just really loving it. And again, guys, at the end of the day, we want to help you guys accomplish your mission. That's what Blue was saying. That's what we've been saying. Like, it's not about the numbers, and that sounds cliche, but it really is about what the numbers tell us as far as the actions we need to take. So appreciate you guys giving the time today. If you need anything, we're always here for you, and would love to continue to interact. Okay, cool. Okay, anything else? Brandon, show us your tattoo, please.
It's right here. It's wrapped up. It's wrapped up. It's the Seahawks symbol, but it's wrapped up.
You got to hold it up higher. It's in your name.
Sorry.
He's got a Geno Smith like tattoo because
Yeah, do you feel good having that after their week 2 loss? I'm just
no, he had to get it.
Yeah, I'm not a bandwagon fan like people from LA. Okay, so let's just say that. Let's be really clear. Okay, Jeff, if you're gonna throw shade at me,
dang.
Hey, your team's from St. Louis. That's all I'm gonna say. All right.
Oh gosh. All right, we'll see you guys next month.
Thank you all for having me. Appreciate it, guys.
See
Thank
you,
you.
Blue. Hey, Blue, hang on for a sec.